Good to have everyone with us this morning. And as always, let's begin with a prayer. We may sound like we're talking in tongues, but I think it's good for us to pray together and out loud. So let's all pray together. You are with us, Holy Spirit, as we gather in your name. As you guide us, make yourself at home in our hearts. Teach us the way to go, how to follow your guidance. We are attentive and ready. Help us to promote hope and peace. Holy wisdom, lead us in a love that influences our actions. Let us find in you our unity as we journey together in light. All this we ask of you, who are at work in every place and time. Glory to you, source of all being, eternal Word, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And now, Pat, over to you, and we just need you to unmute yourself. We just need you to unmute.
Okay, I did it. All right, welcome to everyone. We are so thrilled that you're joining us today for this transformational training. Non-Positional Thinking, Life Unlearned. This is a science-based training. It gives us the tools for transformational dialogue with those with whom we have differing opinions, differing points of view, ideas that are in opposition to our own. Dr. Ariane David, our trainer and facilitator, is the one who is giving us the training today. She holds a doctorate in human and organizational systems and has evolved this training over 40 years, having worked with various communities such as corporations, government, universities, and she is giving this to us. This is a gift from Ariane today. So today you'll be given the highlights and the tools to take with you to begin practicing with, I'm going to put it this way, kindly and willing family and friends. A good place to start there. I would like to also acknowledge those who helped put this together: Mary Louise Knapp, Alexina Murphy, and of course, Renee Reed, all of who provided support for this. So Dr. David, thank you for offering us your time and your expertise.
Thank you, and it's just wonderful to be here. First of all, this is an informal training. So at any time, if you want to ask a question, please, you can raise your hand, you can raise your electronic hand, which will show up in the chat, or you can just wave your hand, and Pat or Renee or John, if you see it, just let me know, because I probably won't see it. So anyway, feel free. This is a dialogue. An important part of the dialogue is some understanding of how it is that we think. Einstein once said that all the problems in the world were created through thinking, and that we can't change anything without first changing the way we think. So we're going to be looking at how we think and seeing how we can apply that to our lives. And I urge you to, or I encourage you to look first at your life, the people in your life, your personal life, as opposed to the huge, expansive work that you do. Simply because, when you start exercising a muscle, you start with 3-pound weights, not 300-pound weights. So, and I think that when we deal with the people who love us, there's a willingness to take that journey with us. So we're going to, I encourage you to think about not only the large work that you're doing, which is huge, it's important, it's brilliant, it's needed, but your personal lives, your lives with your spouses, your partners, your parents, your children, your friends, the people that you work with, and look at those relationships and see how it is in those relationships that you could really break down some barriers. So let me share my screen here. Give me just 1 second. Thank you. Okay. Great. So this is going to be, we're going to be talking about non-positional thinking. The first part of this seminar is going to be about non-positional thinking. And then we're going to take what we've learned in non-positional thinking and bring it into the arena of transformative dialogues, whether it's on a personal level or whether it's on the level of the world or the church. So what would it mean to you, and how would it change your life if you discovered that what you see isn't there and what you remember didn't happen and what you believe about people and things isn't so? How would that change your life? So keep those questions in your mind as we go forward, because today we're going to learn a new way of thinking that'll forever change the way you see the world and you see your opinions. So what is non-positional thinking? Well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Usually, and I've used conservative and liberal because that seems to be the great impasse and the great challenge in the world today. And we've moved away from civility in almost all things, in almost all governments, in almost all organizations, and we've moved to an adversarial position. So what does non-positional thinking mean? Well, ordinarily, we think along a continuum. And we think that, well, someplace in the middle is a good place to be. It's good to be centrist. We are extreme at some points because, we believe very strongly in it. But at whatever point we are along this line, from conservative to liberal, from any belief to any other belief, we take a position along the line. Non-positional thinking asks us to actually rise above the line and to look down at all positions and examine all positions. So that's a very different way of looking at things than the way that we usually look at it. So in positional thinking, we look at what's obvious, what's easy to see, and we look at those things that reinforce our position. We also assume that there's one right position, and that position is our position. Think to the last time you had an argument with a loved one. Remember what it felt like. They had a position, you had a position, you felt that you were right. A little bit later on, we'll talk about cycles of defensiveness, which are ways of being with each other that we dig into, whether it's with an individual, whether it's in an organization or a government or the world. In positional thinking, we tend to challenge the other person's position. We don't challenge our position, or if we do, we certainly don't challenge it with the same logic and the same vigor that we challenge their position. We tend not to look at our contribution in the problem. So once again, going back to individual conflicts, individual conversations that we might have, we tend to not ask ourselves the questions, how did I contribute to this conflict? What did I do? Even if it's not obvious, even if it's small, how did I contribute? And because of that, we tend to blame others. In that last argument that you had, it was their fault. It was very clear to you. Of course, it was clear to them that it was your fault. And then because of all of this, we don't listen to them. We don't hear their position. So it's valuable for you to know that your position is nothing more than your theory about what's going on. It's not the way it is. It's simply your point of view. So that's a great place for us to start. So we're going to look now at, because it's valuable, because not only valuable, it's imperative that you understand where it is that these thoughts are coming from and how it is that we think. So let's start right away. We're going to look at several theorists, just because this non-positional thinking is backed in the science of thinking. We're going to look at 4 theorists to begin with. The first is Sir Frederick Bartlett, and he started way back in 1932 with some experiments, and he was really interested. He was at Cambridge, and he was really interested in how it is that we think, because he had noticed some anomalies in the way that people think. So he came up with an experiment. It was called the War of the Ghosts. And in this, he gave his students a story to read. Now, remember that in 1932, his students would have consisted primarily of upper class or certainly wealthy young men who were used to a certain way of life. And so he told them this story. They read this story. It was an indigenous story about some young men who went down to the river to hunt seals. And in the story, they encounter people in canoes who were going down the river to fight some ghosts. Anyway, they read this story, and an interesting thing happened. When he asked the students to recall what they had read, they wrote it down. And then a week later, he asked them to recall it again, and a week later again. And he noticed something, he noticed something very interesting. And that was that the stories got shorter and shorter and shorter. And then at one point, they started getting longer and longer and longer. When he analyzed the stories, what he noticed was that as the stories got shorter, more and more details were left out. And the details that were left out were details that didn't jibe with his students' way of life. So the seals dropped out, the canoes dropped out, the ghosts dropped out. And in the end, the final story that was now embellished was a story that any upper class young English gentleman would understand. The canoes turned into rowboats, the seals turned into fish, the ghosts turned into a tribe down the river, etc. So he said, what's going on here? They changed the story based on what they already knew. In another experiment that he called the Asian mask, he showed the students, he took one student, he lined up the students, he took one student, and he showed that student what he called portrait d'homme, which is a portrait of a man, and it looked like this, quite an Aboriginal sort of design. And that student drew it and showed it to the student behind him. And this is what that student drew, and went through this process for no more than 4 times before this turned into the perfect English gentleman. Each person changed it just a little bit to make it more in keeping with what he believed. So what was going on here? So he asked himself that question, and he decided, and he did many, many, many more experiments to bear this out, but then he realized that there were structures that existed in the brain already. Those structures were templates, and every bit of new information that came into those templates was changed to fit the existing beliefs. Fast forward now to 1942, we have two psychologists, Alport and Postman. They were doing an experiment. The experiment had to do with how rumors and gossip spread, and what they discovered had nothing to do with that, but was far more powerful. They showed their small audience a picture, a slide of a white man, clearly dirty and disheveled, and he's handling, you can't see that, but he has a straight razor in his hand, and he's in a very menacing position with a black man who's very clean. He's wearing a suit. His hands are clasped in front of him in a very submissive position. And when the people were asked to recall what they saw, what do you think they saw? They recalled, 62% of them recalled a disheveled, dirty black man with a straight razor in his hand, menacing a white man. How could this happen? Clearly, the people were operating under their existing biases, and their existing biases changed what it is that they saw. The next theorist was Elizabeth Loftus in the 60s and 70s at the University of Washington. And, at the time she realized that people were being sent to jail, people were being executed based on eyewitness testimony, which was considered pretty much the most fundamental kind of testimony. And she did some experiments. One of them was showing a short film to some of her participants in the survey. And there were two cars involved, a white car and a red car. And they both advanced into the intersection, and there was a fender bender. Afterwards, she gave one half of the room one survey and the other half of the room the same survey with a single different question. And that was the question that said, what speed was the green car going when the cars touched? Later on, people were shown a color wheel and asked what color the cars were, and they remembered, again, a majority of people remembered a white car and a green car. So what that showed was that memory, so we already found out from Bartlett that perception is changed by what we already believe, but now not only does that happen, but now memory is changed by what happens to you afterwards. So by words that you use, by things that you see or hear, your memories are not permanent. They are constantly being changed. So what we remember may never have happened. What we saw may never have been there. So from this, we gained an understanding that perception is not accurate, that memory is completely different. I remember a funny story from when I was young. My sister and I were walking in the street one day. We were, maybe 10 and 13, and we saw a very cute guy in a sports car. And we got home, and my sister says to my father, "Oh, Daddy, we saw this cutest guy, and he was in a maroon sports car with a black beret." And I said, "No, it was a black sports car, and he was wearing a maroon beret." And we never were able to reconcile it, but interestingly, we both remembered entirely different things. So we're going to look at perception, memory, and then another thing that we're going to bring in is emotions, because emotions hold a much more prominent and much more important place in the things that we do. So let's look at oops, we did that already. Oh, by the way, Elizabeth Loftus did a really interesting experiment looking at recovered memories. And in the 70s, people were just starting to recover, memories. And she said, well, how accurate is this actually? And so she did another experiment, and she found out from this experiment was for kids young people, they were college students, they were always college students, right? Who had been to Disneyland when they were young. And so she said to each of these kids, she said, "Oh, you know, your mom was telling me that you had your picture taken at Disneyland with Bugs Bunny. How was that for you?" And amazingly, of course, Bugs Bunny is not a Disney character, so would never have been at Disneyland. And amazingly, these people remembered having their picture taken with Bugs Bunny. So clear indication that recalled lost memories can often be fabricated just by what we hear. All right, so let's look at perception. What is the purpose of perception? Well, the purpose of perception is specifically to make meaning out of what we sense. Information comes in through our senses. How do we make meaning of that? And the only way that we can make meaning, as Loftus and as Bartlett showed us, was by fitting new experiences into what we already believe. What Bartlett called schemas, I call organizing patterns, which are a little bit different, but they're basically the same. So at any given moment, our sensory apparatus is barraged by somewhere around 11 million bits of information per second. It's a huge amount of information coming in from all of our senses, all of the things that you see around you. Rini, you're outside, you're going to be looking, there's trees, there's birds, there's sounds, there's the sensation of the chair on your body. 11 million bits of information come into your brain. Our conscious minds, however, can only grasp 120 bits per second. What happens to the rest of it? Well, the rest is simply lost forever as we attend to those pieces of information that come into our brains. So, an experiment that was done in the early 70s had to do with how people, once again, how eyewitnesses remember things. And they were in a room waiting supposedly to be interviewed as possible subjects to a psychological experiment. And a person came running into the room, yelling and carrying what looked like a weapon. When people were interviewed afterwards, they remembered very poorly how the person was dressed, what the person looked like, etc., or the surroundings, who else was in the room. What they remembered was the weapon, and the rest was lost. When the same experiment was done and the person came running into the room and was carrying a book, people actually remembered the book. They remembered better what the person was wearing and what the person looked like. An indication that we remember, we perceive what attracts our attention at the moment, and everything else is lost. Same when when I'm changing lanes going 80 miles an hour on the freeway, and someone talks to me, I don't hear it. I just have my eyes on those cars around me. I don't go 80 miles an hour mostly. So memories are subjective and creative. They're a fabrication. They're a creative iteration. They change every time we recall them. How do we know that? Because experiments have shown that happens. When we understand the neurology, and we're going to go into that in just a moment, we'll understand why they change so easily. So we can never be certain about what we remember. And one thing that Loftus discovered was that when eyewitnesses were absolutely certain, while the jury could easily be swayed by that, confidence was not correlated at all with accuracy. So you can never be sure about what you perceive and you can never be sure that it happened the way you remember it. In fact, what you can be sure of is that it didn't. What you remember, what you perceive that you're so certain was accurate is not. So let's move to emotions. What are the purpose of emotions? I know it feels like our emotions are in the back of our throats, are in our brain. The purpose of emotions are rapid response. And you know, when you understand where emotions came along, they really originated when we were one-celled animals. And it was whatever sensory apparatus allowed that one-celled animal to do something. The first one-celled animals just floated along. Then at some point, a mutation occurred, and some one-celled animals had the ability to respond to stimuli, either the feeling of water, light, whatever it was, they had the ability to respond. As organisms got more and more and more complex, the ways in which they could respond got more and more and more complex. So by the time you got to fish, you know, fish could respond to millions of different stimuli with a myriad of different ways. And by the time you get to humans, the ways in which we can respond are incalculable. In fact, the ways in which we can respond have really been called complex. And complexity in the scientific world means unpredictability and means really uncountable ways in which things can change. The function of emotions, and this is a function that we rarely hear about, is to govern decision making. And we're going to find out in just a moment, how is this possible? So, whoops, keep jumping ahead of myself. So a contemporary, a current neuroscientist called Antonio Damasio, who's done some really pivotal work in terms of understanding the functions of emotion, discovered something very interesting. And what he discovered was that decisions, no matter how logical we think they are, in the end, are governed by emotions. One of his very famous experiments, repeated many times, what had to do with people who had through accident or through illness, had the amygdala, which is the emotion holding part of the brain, the emotion processing part of the brain. Also, by the way, it's the only brain that dinosaurs have or had. It's the size of a walnut, and so even huge Tyrannosaurus Rex literally had a brain the size of a walnut. And then, of course, they had, you know, much more in their brains that governed balance and things like that. But in terms of decision making, their brain was the size of a walnut. So he took people whose amygdala, whose emotional part of the brain was disconnected from the cerebral cortex, which is the new part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain. And he did some experiments. And one of the things that he discovered was that they had all of the intelligence that they had before their accident, before their illness, or whatever. If they could speak languages, they continued to speak languages, play the piano, they could do that. Their memories were intact. There was just one way in which they were different. And that's that they had no way of processing emotion. So we took these two groups, the normal group and the group who had this problem between the amygdala and the cerebral cortex. And he gave them, one of his famous experiments was he gave them 4 stacks of playing cards. And the instructions were that these stacks of playing cards some have more, some have fewer, what he called money-making cards. And these money-making cards were picture cards. Now, these weren't ordinary decks. Some of the decks had many picture cards. Some of the decks had almost no picture cards. The people with normal brains very quickly figured out, and by the way, if they picked a picture card, they got $1. So the people with normal brains very quickly figured out which decks had the most picture cards, and that's the decks that they went to first. The people who did not have normal brains, even though they quickly determined that one stack had more picture cards than another, continued to pick from the other stacks because because the knowing which decks had the most reward didn't trigger any emotions in them, and so they couldn't make decisions that were literally in their own best interest. And further experiments showed that, yes, indeed, people who had this problem continued to make poor decisions in their life because they couldn't, because no emotion was attached to it. So emotions in the end are govern decision making, and you know, some of us know that we make decisions emotionally. Some of us feel that we make decisions very, very rationally. I have a friend who's probably one of the smartest people I know. He's an attorney. He's brilliant. And when he was in his 40s, he was not having a lot of luck with women. He had a lot of luck with women, he just not the women he wanted. And so he decided that he was going to approach this in a very logical way. So he made a spreadsheet, which of course is the exact right way to fall in love. And on this spreadsheet, you know, he put the names of the women on top, and off to the left column, he listed all of the characteristics that he wanted in a woman. And then he rated each of the women, added up the numbers, and started dating the women with the highest numbers. And there was one woman who barely made it onto the spreadsheet. She just was not any of the things that he thought he wanted. So he didn't bother dating her. And so he dated all the women. And in the end, he didn't like any of them. None of them worked. But he kept thinking about this woman who barely made it onto the spreadsheet. And he kept calling her because, you know, he liked talking to her. And finally, one day she said to him, "Look, date me or stop calling me." And he dated her, and they've been married for 40 years. So he was certain about the logic of his decision, and yet in the end, his decision, the right decision, was emotional. So organizing patterns are what I call schemas. They're templates. They're constructed out of all the beliefs and memories of emotions that we have, and those templates ultimately allow us to interpret information and make sense out of the information. Everything that we perceive has to fit into an organizing pattern. If it doesn't, it's either shoehorned in other words, it's changed to fit that belief, or it's discarded. Now, an interesting story from a very famous anthropologist named Colin Turnbull, who worked with the Mbuti people in what was called the Congo at the time. And he was studying them. He lived in their village. Now, these were what they call forest people. They lived in the forest, in the jungle, and rarely went out, almost never went out. And when they did, it was perhaps into a clearing where they would meet people from other tribes and trade and, you know, exchange information, mix up the gene pool a little bit. And one day, Turnbull decided that he really wanted to go down the mountain and get some provisions. And so he invited one of the young men of the village to go with him. And the young man was eager and very happy. And they drove, and he leaves the forest, and he's now headed down the mountain. And all of a sudden, the young man says to him, "What are those insects? I've never seen them before." And Turnbull looked, there was no insects. What there was a herd of water buffalo grazing in the distance. And they looked black, and they looked about this big. This young man had never seen water buffalo before. And he had never seen distance. His brain literally had never seen anything further than 300 meters. And so his brain, his only organizing pattern, the only template that he had for something black that was moving around was that it was an insect. Now his brain very, very quickly got accustomed to it. But this is and had to create a new organizing pattern for something called insects. So every new experience that we have must fit into an existing organizing pattern. Otherwise, it's changed, as we saw with the water buffalo, or it's discarded completely. Organizing patterns start at birth. We start the moment that we're born, we start building these structures that help us make sense out of the world. So that the sum of all the organizing patterns in our brain makes up the universe in which we live. It's the world according to me. Man looks at his world through transparent templates, which he creates and then attempts to fit over the realities of which the world is composed. George Kelly, one of the very, very prominent psychologists in the 60s and 70s. Some examples of organizing patterns. You look at that, you see a circle, but it's dots. The circle is one of the most primal organizing patterns that we have in terms of shapes. So we tend to see things in the shapes that we know. Okay, this is a colon, upward arrow, and a parenthesis. We see a face. Why? Because a face is one of the first organizing patterns that we create, the face of the mother. This is a famous sculpture in Havana, Cuba. None of us has difficulty in recognizing that this is a conversation between two people. It even looks like two men. But their faces look like kites, and half of them are missing. Half of their bodies are missing, and yet we see that these are two men having a conversation. So, okay. So these are just examples of organizing patterns. All right, let me just get back to where we are here. So as a result of how the brain functions and our need to have things fit into what we already know, let's look at what I call the tyrannies of the brain. This is the way the brain directs our thinking, the way it forces us to think in a certain way. The first is the tyranny of knowledge. And this is the belief that what we know is the truth, that our knowledge is the true knowledge. We tend to do what works only because it worked in the past. We assume that the future will be like the past. And I'll tell you that that fallacy has never been more obvious than today. Or in the last election in the US, we had people who had never miscalled a presidential election in the last 50 years, and they miscalled this election. So seeing or believing that the future is going to be like the past absolutely doesn't work anymore. The next one is the tyranny of emotion. Everything, every decision that we make, every belief that we hold is grounded in emotion, because emotion, it comes out of the Latin, emotus, motion. Where was I going with this? Every action we take is based on emotion. The word comes from the word to move. There is no movement without emotion first. So as a result, we confuse our emotional commitment with the reality, because I am committed to this emotion. And this is so important, because I am emotionally committed to my position, I believe my position to be right. Uh, there are some things that we're emotionally committed to. There's some things that I'm emotionally committed to. A lot of it has to do with spiritual commitment that I will never be talked out of. There is nothing that you can say to talk me out of my emotional commitment to certain things. Does that mean that it's the only way to look at things? The answer is no, absolutely not. So I'm going to ask you not to look at this emotional commitment in terms of very, very broad ideological or religious, primarily religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. Look at them in terms of your commitment to a particular argument, a particular way of seeing things that you have with your loved ones in life, with your partners in life. How committed you are to your side of the argument, that it makes it unreconcilable. That is the tyranny of motion, of emotion. So let us switch now to logic, because our view of logic is intensely intertwined with emotion. So the tyranny of logic. First of all, what is logic? Really ask yourself that question. What is logic? How many systems of logic are there in the world? Is it possible for something to be absolutely logical? Can someone ever be illogical? Is someone ever illogical? So you probably, because this is the kind of seminar training that it is, you have probably come to the conclusion that no, nothing is intrinsically logical. Logic is nothing more than your theory of the world. That is your view of the world. The world is your game, and you have created the rules for that game. Logic is the rules for your thinking. There are as many systems of logic as there are human beings on the face of the earth. We have the tendency to think that my logic is the right logic, that my truth is the right truth. And not only that, but that it's my truth, but it should be obvious to you. Why are you not seeing? Why are you not seeing what is obviously so logical to me? So logic is a subjective fabrication. It's like taste. Can you argue with someone? I love cilantro. My daughter hates it. It tastes like Lysol to her. It's delicious to me. Can I argue with her? Can I tell her that cilantro is delicious? No, because it's her sense of taste. Well, logic is like taste. Now, why does this even matter? Well, it matters because if we believe that our logic is the correct logic, and we see this in politics all the time, whether it's the politics of the church, whether it's the politics of our government, we see their point of view as being absolutely illogical. How can you even think that? We think. It is so obvious. Their logic is different from us, which means that they have different priorities from the priorities that we have. Logic is based to a large degree on values. What do I value? So if you take one person who's vegan, which means that they eat no meat, that they know animal products, and they do this for reasons, let's say philosophical reasons. They feel that they have no right to inflict suffering on another being in order to have some enjoyment out of food. That is a system of logic based on values. Obviously, that person values whatever it is that they value. Talk to someone who is an avid meat eater, who maybe they're very particular about their protein. Maybe they eat only wild caught fish, free roaming beef. They have a different system of logic. For them, they want to live in a way that is possibly what they consider to be the most healthy possible way, et cetera. And I don't know many of those arguments, but you see, each argument is based on a logic that has a different set of beliefs, a different set of principles behind them. So one of our tendencies is to believe that it's either me or you in your arguments that you have in your home with the people that you love. It's either their argument or your argument. And what I'd like to propose to you is that there is no absolute argument, that there's no either or. When you're dealing with human beings, it's never either or. There are always areas of their arguments, and we're going to get into that in a moment. There's always things that they believe, that they see, that have validity. So it's never either or. It's always both. And your job, see, here is your job. Your job is to move away from either or into both and to discover how they are logical, to discover how they make sense, to discover how they are right. So remember, we started with these questions. Excuse me. I'm sorry. We started with these questions. What if what you see isn't there? What if what you remember never happened? And what if what you believe about people and things and situations isn't true? How would that change your life? So with that under our hats, with that understanding, we're going to now look at 4 principles of non-positional thinking. And these principles are really the guiding principles for transformative dialogue. Courage, the first one is courage. None of this, transformative dialogue, non-positional thinking, none of it is possible without courage. And as we can see in the world, courage is sorely lacking. We have come to associate courage with bravery in battle, taking a bullet for somebody, throwing yourself in front of a speeding car to protect some. We have come to think of courage in that way. What we don't think of is courage as an emotional courage, as a courage of the heart. The courage to do what is odious to us, what is painful to us, what is difficult, what is frightening. I'm trying to remember a quote. Oh, it was Joseph Campbell said that the cave that we fear most to enter holds the treasure that we seek. And for the most part in the world, we don't see the courage to enter that cave. So courage means being determined to grow beyond our point of view. And that's very threatening to the brain. It's very threatening to the organizing patterns. You see, because the organizing patterns tell us that this is the way it must be. And when an organizing pattern is threatened, it becomes reinforced. There's something called the backfire effect. And in this backfire effect, and this is actually something that has been proven in research, and that is that when someone perceives that a dearly held belief is being attacked, in other words, when an organizing pattern is being attacked, the organizing pattern actually fortifies itself and becomes stronger. So in arguing with someone, you're actually having the opposite effect. If what you want to do is change their point of view, that's the absolute wrong way of going about it. And a little bit later, when we talk about transformative conversations, we're going to see exactly why this exists. Okay, the uncertainty principle, which is intellectual humility, means simply realizing what it is that we've already spoken about. It means realizing that the way that your brain functions does not allow you to be certain really about anything. Look, you can be certain enough to survive. Remember, this is a survival technique. So it's good enough to survive, but it's not good enough to give you absolute certainty in the way you think, and certainty that your constructed universe is the way the world is the cause of all of the world's problems today. And then humility simply means acknowledging it. And by the way, you don't need to be paralyzed into not knowing what to do. This is not what that means. And it doesn't mean giving up your beliefs. It means realizing, it means putting a chink in your armor of certainty. So then, if you realize that you can't be certain about what you believe, then what? Well, then the curiosity principle says, let me find out. And curiosity is being eager, not grudging, but eager to discover what it is that we don't know. Eager why they see something different from what we see. This is very different from what we call curiosity, which is, a good friend of mine is a great example of this. She's a very contrary person, and I love her anyway. But she loves to be right, and she loves to contradict. And I'll say something to her, that I heard, and then, she picks up her cell phone and her little thumbs start going, and she pulls up something on Google that shows that I'm wrong. So she has curiosity, but her curiosity is really oriented at finding out how maybe I'm not right. So curiosity is not being eager to prove them wrong, but eager and determined to see the merit of their argument. And this is going to be very, very important when it comes to transformative dialogue. And that leads to the really impartial gathering of information. So we're going to look at something that comes out of the kind of positional thinking, and that's called the cycle of defensiveness. And the bad news is that if you're in a close relationship with someone, you're in a cycle of defensiveness. That can be a person, it can be an organization. And the cycle of offensiveness, this is a broad, the 30-mile view of cycle of defensiveness. And it just means that something happens. One person, whoever it is, it doesn't matter, because the cycle of defensiveness has no beginning. So we think it began when person A did something to person B, but you know what? It really, backs up, well, yeah, but person A wouldn't have reacted defensively if person B hadn't. So what we see is that action and defensiveness happens in a cyclical way. And here's kind of an anatomy of it. Some old issue or a new issue, and by the way, every new issue that comes up that you argue about is not a new issue. That's just a new face to an old issue. Something has been emotionally triggered in you that makes this emotion look like something that happened in the past. So just because it looks like a new issue, just know that it's an old issue. So it's an old issue that comes up, and it gets dumped into an organizing pattern. And that organizing pattern creates defensiveness. And in creating defensiveness, we now start listening only to refute them so that we can be right, so that we can defend ourselves. Well, in that defense, then, our only defense in the cycle of defensiveness is blame. We have to make them the cause. And as you see here in the middle, cycles of defensiveness are fueled through fear, which is generally the fear of losing something of ourselves. Carl Rogers once said, we don't listen to others because we fear that if we listen, we will be changed. We will lose something. So we don't listen. We undoubtedly, and I want you to think about this, and I don't want you to take my word on anything but the science of it, which you can check. But don't take my word for it, but think about it. That's all I ask, is be open enough to think about it. In your cycle of defensiveness, you are the victim. They're doing it to you. Which is kind of interesting because they're in the cycle of defensiveness and they, of course, see that you're doing it to them. So you're both victims. You're both seeing the other as the victimizer. And when you are the victim, you don't need to take responsibility because it's their fault. When you don't take responsibility, when you're the victim, when you're defensive, when you can't listen to what's going on, no new understanding happens. No matter how you hammer your point of view, it doesn't make a difference. And then your organizing pattern is wonderfully reinforced. They have once again proven to you that they're not trustworthy, that they're wrong, that they don't care about you, that they're selfish, that they're stupid, whatever it is, they have once again reinforced that in you. So that's the information. Let's look now at how we can transform this information into a transformative dialogue, into a way of listening and a way of speaking that really makes a difference. So how do we turn all this information into bridging the gap? And that, of course, is through transformative information. And the transformative information, transformative dialogues is the bridge, and it's the bridge to understanding. So let's look at it. In traditional arguments, we tend to simplify people's arguments. And we generally do this by listening until we hear something that triggers something in us and we go, ah, I know exactly what they're saying. And we really take an argument, and their argument is heavily imbued with history, with emotion, with experience. So their argument is not simple. Even the argument that looks simple, even when I look at that person who is so politically different from me, and I think, what is the matter with this person? How can they reduce the whole thing to this one little thing? And then I grab onto that, and it's almost like a straw man argument. I grab onto the simplest, most exaggerated points of view, and I shoot that down. I listen to their argument, not with curiosity, not with the intention of learning anything, but with the intention of being right. Problem with this way of listening, with this way of, I'm not even going to call it dialogue, and with this way of discussing, doesn't work, and it's never worked. So what does work? Well, there are some things that work. And interestingly enough, they're counterintuitive, because when we argue, our defenses are set, we're now armed, we're now ready to fight for our point of view. And that's what it feels like. I can't back down. As if the only possibility was to stick to your guns, and I'm going to use that word, and I hate nonviolent language, but it is a violent act. The kind of arguments we have is a violent act. We stick to our guns, or I've got to back down. I've got to surrender. And unfortunately, and I'm going to digress here on a completely different topic for 1 second, that is also the way we look at peace in the world. We look at peace as just another part of war. War has these 10 things that happen. And then there's this 11th, and it's called peacemaking. But when we make peace, we make it with the same intensity, the same need to be right, the same need to dominate as we waged war. Are we surprised peace doesn't work? That lasting peace is not possible when it's based on that? So we wage our arguments in the same way. The way to make it work, though, is completely counterintuitive. We have to respect the person. Respect. Respect is huge. We have to listen rather than demeaning them. No matter how odious their point of view is, we have to become an empty vessel. We already know that what we know is not accurate. How inaccurate it is, we don't know. And since we don't know, that means we have to listen. With uncertainty, very, very counterintuitive, especially for those of us who hail from the United States. Uncertainty is, especially in a politician, is viewed as, you might as well be demented, because that's how undesirable uncertainty is. Curiosity. Curiosity means becoming an open vessel. Right now, what we're doing is a backboard, and they're lobbing their argument onto the backboard, and we're lobbing our argument onto their backboard, and nothing changes. It comes right back to us. Curiosity is lobbing their argument into a basket. You see, allowing it to be someplace, be receptive. And then, of course, listening to understand. Those are the parts of a transformative dialogue. So anyway, I want you to imagine this, and I want you to imagine, rather than having an orange cup and a green cup, imagine that the cup on your left is filled with orange liquid, the cup on your right is filled with green liquid. Now here are your instructions. Your job is to somehow transfer all the green liquid into the left-hand cup and all the orange liquid into the right-hand cup. How are you going to do that? Well, one way of doing it is to add a third cup, right? Now, you are the orange. You have the cup with the orange liquid. This person that you're having this kind of conflicted discussion with has the green cup. Now, here's the way it usually goes. What you say to them is, okay, pour out your green cup. Pour out your green liquid into the middle cup, and then I'll pour my liquid into your cup, and then we can pour your green liquid into my cup, and voila, we will have fulfilled the objectives. The problem is that you have no control over what they're going to do. And they're going, I'm not going to do that. You pour yours out first. And that's where our arguments stall. I'll listen to you when you listen to me. Oh, no, I'll listen to you when you listen to me. And that's where it stalls. The only cup you have control of is what? Is the orange cup. The only action you have control of is what you do. So guess what? You get to be first in pouring out the liquid in your cup into the middle cup. And now look what's possible. Now the person on the right can pour their cup out into your cup, and then you can pour your liquid into their cup. And now you see, magically, you have changed the liquid. You have switched the liquid in the cups. And the first thing that you had to do in order to do that was to be the first to be receptive, to be the first to receive, and to receive wholeheartedly. So now that we know what this looks like, here's, and I hate laundry lists. I hate, seeing these are the seven things that really successful rich people do. This is the 10 things you've got to do. I hate that, but we sometimes need it. So I'm going to give you this little list of how you can do that based on the information that you have. First one is, and by the way, this goes for every single thing in your life. But it's really important when it comes to those discussions that you have. For instance, when you're fighting with that person that you love, what is your goal? Do you even think about what your goal is? Is your goal to be right and maybe lose that person? Maybe lose that relationship? Maybe make that relationship more uncomfortable, more difficult? Or is your goal to enhance the relationship, to increase the love? If your goal is the former, the first one, then argue as much as you want. Call them whatever you want, because that's a sure way to destroy that relationship. If, on the other hand, you want to strengthen the relationship, to strengthen the communication, then that's going to be your objective. That's going to be the target. That's going to be every word that comes out of your mouth is going to be in service of that objective. The second part is depersonalize. Excuse me. The second part is depersonalize. People's arguments are not about you. People's lives are not about you. It looks like it is, but it's about them. So if someone has slighted you, especially someone you love, look, they're not out to hurt you. If they are, you know what? You better go back to goal number one and get out of that relationship. But people are about being right. It's about them. So depersonalize. Don't take this, well, I'm insulted that you said that. Don't be insulted. Don't be hurt. Just go on. Summon your courage. Summon your courage to do what's needed, what's right. Summon your courage to not have to be right. Take responsibility. Look at that cycle of defensiveness and say, how have I participated in this cycle of defensiveness? What can I claim, even if it's just a tiny thing? Sometimes that tiny thing, the other person, I have a situation going on now with some friends who are very, very close to me. And what they did was totally inappropriate. People have told me so. People have agreed with me. But what they've done is inappropriate. But I have had to look at my responsibility. What can I take responsibility for? And I found that what I could take responsibility for was that I was not 100% honest with them. Was that when I started feeling uncomfortable with what they were doing, I didn't say anything. It was too uncomfortable to say something. I was too afraid of damaging the relationship to say something. So I have had to take responsibility for the fact that I didn't speak up when I could have spoken up. So very often what we have to take responsibility for can be a tiny thing, a small thing which, if it didn't happen, could possibly have shifted ever so slightly how that relationship was going. We need to take responsibility for how our actions impact others. We tend to judge people's actions by the impact that they have on us. Wow, you did that and it hurt me. And we don't look at their intentions. We judge ourselves by our intentions, not by the impact that our actions have on them. And of course, they're judging us by the impact that our actions have on them. So we need to recognize and take responsibility for the impact that our actions and words have on them. We have to acknowledge to ourselves that we can't be certain about what's going on. And then we have to give ourselves permission to be curious and to listen with the purpose of understanding. Excuse me. So now with this in mind, the first thing to do is to listen intensely to what they have to say. I'm going to tell you a little story about a man that I just have huge admiration for. His name is Daryl Davis. He is a Black man. He was also a musician. He is actually a musician now. He lived in the South, and he spent his childhood, or he spent his first 11 years in a Black neighborhood. And in a Black neighborhood, he went to a school where all the kids were Black, the shop owners were Black, and everything was good. And then when he was 11 years old, his parents moved to a suburb of I don't remember the town, and Boston. And suddenly he was the only white kid in the school. And they hated him. And this was in the early 80s. And he came home one day and he said, "Why do they hate me? They don't know me." And that was a driver in his life. And he went on, he became a musician, a successful musician in his area. And finally, he decided he was going to answer this question. And he very audaciously, because he was known as a musician and he had a name like Daryl Davis that could have made him anybody, he invited a man named Roger Moore. Excuse me, it wasn't Roger Moore. Anyway, I don't remember his name. To a meeting in a motel room. And this man, by the way, was a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And the man shows up at the door, sees a Black man. Behind him, this Klansman had the reputation for being ruthless. And he had in tow a bodyguard who was toting a gun. Who, by the way, during the meeting was pulling his gun out of his holster, twirling it. And during this meeting, Davis did only one thing, and that is that he listened. And he just asked this person about his life, about his, what it meant to him to be a racist, a Klansman. Anyway, they parted ways, and he spent the next 5 years attending Klan rallies. And he spoke to people, and not once did he tell people why they were wrong, why they shouldn't be racist, why they should like him, why they should accept Black people. He only listened to them. He became that empty vessel that gave them the sense that they were being heard. And in the end, after 5 years, he had converted no fewer than 200 people away from their racist ways, including the original Klan wizard with whom he met. He is the embodiment of transformative dialogues. So in this dialogue, you ask yourself, what is it I'm not seeing? And you ask questions only if those questions are necessary to clarify. We often ask questions that we think will make them look stupid. Here's a question. And, we ask the questions that we feel will make them look like an idiot. But we don't do that. So dialogues of this kind, or even fair debates, are not adversarial opportunities for you to make your opponent look like an idiot. They're opportunities to grow and to improve our thinking skills and create a dialogue. Now, when do you get your turn? Daryl never had his turn until much later on, because the more you listen to people, the more they trust you. Now, in your personal arguments, you're going to have to find the time when it's appropriate. When it's appropriate is not while they're talking to you. Have this conversation be only about listening to them and end the conversation. Now, when you listen to them, it's important that you understand their argument and that you try very, very hard to get the essence of their argument. In fact, one way of looking at it is that reframe their argument in such a powerful way that they say to you or think, wow, that is so right on. I wish I had thought of that way of reframing. One of the people that I know who is just gifted in this way is Pat Berberick. She has a gift for hearing what I say as I think as I speak, and so sometimes my thoughts are not fluid, as you've noticed. And she has a way of hearing it so deeply that she said, okay, so in other words, and she gives it back to me in such a clean, understandable form that I invariably say to her, wow, that is so right on. I wish I had thought of that. And so that's how intensely and clearly you want to get their argument. Now, you have to train yourself to do this. This is not easy to do. And one way in which you can train yourself to do this, especially on a one-to-one that you might have with a person who's in your life, and that is to listen for something that you haven't heard before. Oh, wow. You said that, that you felt that about that. You said it was Tuesday. You said you were wearing a blue dress, whatever it is. Whatever it is, listen to hear something that you haven't heard before, and then give it back to them, not in their words. What would I hear you saying? This is the way we're taught. What I hear you saying, and then give it back to them using their words. Don't do that. That's lazy, and it doesn't work. And you know when people are doing that to you. They know when you're doing it to them. So, this is what happens in the cycle of defensiveness. This is what happens in a transformative dialogue. The fuel for the transformative dialogue has been changed from fear and blame to respect. Something happens. We now approach that thing that has happened with respect and with uncertainty. We take responsibility. We don't have to say it. Although at some point in the cycle of defensiveness, you're going to have to say it. But we take responsibility for our part in the cycle of defensiveness. We approach them with openness and curiosity. I'm an open vessel. I'm ready to receive you because I know that there's so much about this that I don't understand. And now I'm open and ready to hear you. We listen, not to refute, but to understand, to get something, to get a new understanding that we haven't had before. The gaining of this new understanding is the core of the transformative dialogue. And now, when something happens, trust has been created, as with Daryl Davis, he created that trust. And with that new little bit of trust, we can go into the next discussion that happens, the next problem that happens, and we keep doing it. And as you can see, as the cycle goes around and around, fueled by respect, you see trust increases, understanding increases, and we start unwinding the damage done by the cycle of defensiveness. So I'm going to end here to give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have them, and there's by no means any obligation to have questions. I want to end on this wonderful quote from Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. All right. Any questions? Oh, there's one question in the chat I see. Oh, it's not a question. Any questions?
Down at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a react button, and feel free to use that to raise your hand. That way we won't miss anyone if someone does want to raise a question or make a comment. I thought it was interesting that Malcolm, about halfway through Ariane's presentation, said, I already feel chastened by what Ariane has said. Mary Varley, let's go to you.
That was fascinating, but I'm really struggling to apply it to something like abuse, where one person or an institution are systematically abusing another.
Yes. So I'd like us to, and I should have said this in the beginning, so thank you, Mary, and John will always remember to do this. This has to do with our personal lives, with our lives and how we listen. At no time, remember, if you remember the original slide, we don't ever have to accept that. However, we cannot get those people. First of all, the people who are doing that systematic abuse are people who need to be removed from the system. And they need for us to be removed from the system by the people who are enabling them to be in the system. So we generally won't be having a transformative dialogue with someone who is actually an abuser. We will, for instance, could have a transformative dialogue with someone who manages abusers, with someone who hides the abuse. You know, pounding that person over the head with, how could you do that? You're equally guilty. All the things that we want to say to them. And very truly, we want to pummel them. We want to make them wrong. We want to make them stop. We want to, all of that. You allowed this to happen. You allowed this to happen to people who were innocent. That's what we want to say. The problem is that's not going to change anything. Just like Daryl Davis did not have to say to any Klansman, you're right. We really are inferior to you. He never said that. He just listened to them. And through his listening to them, through his starting to understand why this person who manages pedophiles or manages abusers has allowed this to happen, you see, we start to see their point of view, what's going on, the fear that fuels them, the tremendous fear. And getting that creates the trust. And in creating that trust, we get them possibly to the point where they will listen to us and maybe never. And then we have to fight this in another way. Mary, does that a little bit answer the question? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, a little bit. It makes me think about dialogue with bishops who have responsibility for managing information that comes to them.
Yes, and the way
we can do that.
We have to look at the situations in your personal life is very different from the situation with bishops, with politicians and stuff like that. Because in a sense, and I don't mean this to malign, but in a sense, they are not what we would call honest actors. They have agendas that we don't see. You see? So we are working to better the church. What are they working for? Our politicians here in this country say that they're working for a better America, but they have an agenda and we cannot fight that agenda. So we might have to go around them. Your organization is all about grassroots, is all about creating transformation in little transformations, but little transformations are huge, can be huge. And so you know what? If you can't go through the bishops, you'll find another way of doing it. If we can't go through politicians in our countries, we have to find another way of doing it. We don't give up. We don't give up our principles. We find a way, like Daryl Davis, of expressing our principles, of manifesting our principles through trust or a different way. Thank you, Mary. That's always a hard question.
Is there another comment or question?
Well, Daniel says, besides, we have to think about the journey of the other person. How come he is at this stage today? What was his or her learning curve? And what was his or her significant experience? And that's really very important. And that's why when we take their arguments and reduce it to something just, so you think abusing people is okay. Oh my God, we've taken this incredible argument with this, this long history behind it and reduced it to nothing. So what we need to do, thank you, Daniel, is not reduce that argument to nothing, but take into consideration and try to understand what brought that person to this place.
One of the thoughts that the team who put this together, Pat, Mary Louise, and Alexina, had discussed was, would you want to go further with this? Today, we just got a sense of what scientific thinking is behind what happens to us in our discussions and dialogues with people. But would you like to go another step further? And
What
one
Rini is saying is that we've learned the tools, so, you want to build a house. So what I've done today is I've just shown you all the tools that are available to you. What we still have to do is experiment with, what we can do is experiment with the tools and find out, what a hammer does and what a pneumatic driver does, and do that. And we can do that, and that's up to you. If you would like to have some follow-ups on this, we can do that. Rini, that's what you were saying, right?
Exactly. And I'd like to open this up to your thinking, but one suggestion that came from it was, what if we had follow-up about the same time next week and had a demonstration? Two people who are discussing something being facilitated by Ariane, while they try to work through their differences applying these tools. And we'd have a chance to listen. The thought of the group was that next week you register for this event with a partner. That means with a family member or a friend or somebody in the church who is conservative when you're liberal, or somebody in politics who is Democrat when you're a Republican. But to be able to come together and just discuss something of passionate value to you, but to have it demonstrated. And we would follow that up with a second gathering, depending upon how that goes. Then the thought came of them having a third gathering the following same time next week, where we go into breakout rooms with the partner that we registered and give you a chance to actually experiment with this process. So
Rini,
what do you think?
it would be necessary for the partner. I think it would be wonderful to have, at least, two people bring partners. The partners would probably need to see the video of this presentation so that they have a sense of what's happening to them.
This will go out to all of you. And by the way, if you're on this call and not on the CCRI mailing list, please put your email in the chat so that we can capture it. But this recording of today's event will go out to everyone. So if you have someone that you want to engage in this or open up the thinking, that you would share that video, that recording with them, and then see whether or not they'd be willing to come back this time next week, just to engage a little, to take one step further in the process. What do you think about that option, Pat?
Well, so Mary says, so very helpful and thought-provoking. I'm now off to have a conversation with my husband about a couple of things. Yes, please go further with this. So that's Mary's point of view. Mary Varley.
Okay, I just wanted to say that if you don't have someone that you can think of that you want to bring in, that's not an impediment to joining in and being part of this conversation through observation and asking questions. Because here's the thing. So you're going to go home, you've learned a few things, you're going to go home and like Mary or whoever just spoke up, you'll want to try and use these tools, right? Even in just a pleasant conversation where you even agree on things, you can still apply these tools to say, tell me more. I want to understand more about where you're coming from on that. So Because the thing is, in applying it, that's where you find out where your questions are. Believe me, it's not always so easy to do, and you can find all these little things being triggered in you. And so that's why, whether or not you bring someone with you, this is my suggestion now. You can, change it, but just to come, and hopefully you've tried it out, and now you can go, learn more by maybe a couple of people doing a real-time dialogue, so that we can maybe being presented with an issue that is going on today where there might be some differences, and just see how it goes. And we learn from it. We learn from it by stumbling into it. It's the way I like to put it. So is that okay to come if you don't have someone to bring with you? And
Absolutely.
Oh, of course.
yeah, I just wanted to ask that because I wouldn't want anybody not to come just because they couldn't find someone to bring with them.
Yes.
Oh God, no, absolutely come. Absolutely come. We learn by watching.
Somebody just had a
I
hand
can't
up.
help but notice that our beloved Pope Francis really was onto something when he opened up the whole concept of creating a synodal church where we learn to listen to one another. And today, Ariane has added a more scientific background to this very spiritual request of Pope Francis that we learn to really listen to one another and to engage in dialogue that begins to make some sense of understanding of where the other side is coming from. And then, as Francis was seeking to find some kind of consensus. So here we are bringing the scientific together with the spiritual and seeing where we can take it.
Charlie,
Charlie.
Charlie has his hand up.
Yes, this follows on to your comment when one of the ladies mentioning about bishops, and you said that the bishops and politicians are not really many of them honest actors. They have an agenda. I can see myself sitting down with a Trumpist and fully listening to what they say. On the other hand, with certain bishops and politicians, I want to slam the hell out of them. So,
Understood.
you know, how do I approach that?
Well, Charlie, that's that is such a great question, because I'll tell you, there are people that I just want to just slap upside the head. So it goes back to this question of what is the goal? Sometimes the goal is to win an argument. Sometimes, God, it just feels so good. And there are people, I don't want to make friends with them. I don't want them to see, I just want to win the argument. That will feel good. Know your goal. If your goal is to win the argument, go for it. Absolutely go for it. If your goal is to try and create the kind of trust and communication that Daryl Davis created, then you have to keep that in mind, and you can't do it by bludgeoning them with your argument. So just know your goal. Go for it. In a divorce, what is your goal? Is your goal to destroy that other person at all costs, even if it takes all your money and it damages the kids? Go for it. But if your goal is to keep, save the children, save the wealth, then you need a different approach. Does that answer your question, Charlie?
Yes, I mean, I guess the thing is, I don't know. I've written letters to certain bishops. I've never gotten a response to. I would like to hear some of it. I guess it's more with the Trump people and the cruelty. We have a lot of feedback here that they have.
Yeah, what I can tell you, I cannot tell you what will work, but I can tell you what won't work. What won't work is more of the same. And we know it won't work because it's never worked. So, we can continue doing it. And as one famous person who has never actually been acknowledged, many people have been given the credit for this statement, but, insanity is doing what you've always done, and expecting different results. What we do does not work, period, end of conversation. We can continue doing it and continue getting out of it what makes us feel good. Sometimes we get trounced, sometimes we say that one thing that, boy, I really got him this time, and that feels good. If we're looking for transformation in the world, that is not going to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of certain those people. How do you neutralize them? Reduce their effectiveness as far as other people are concerned, and that, I guess, that's where I'm coming from.
When you say other people in the world, you mean, other people like in the broader world, or people in your circle, or?
I think the broader world. I mean, I have disagreements with some people in my circle, but I guess from my background and so forth, I like to try to find common ground and you know come to an understanding that we can all live with. Um, I guess I'm thinking of people right now like Trump and Elon Musk and Stephen Miller and those people. Uh, they've caused tremendous damage, and they have quite a following. And how to you know reverse some of that because they aren't going to change their mind. I mean, Trump says he's never said anything he needs to apologize for in his life.
Well, we can't change anybody else. We can't change anybody else, and we have to, things are the way they are now. Uh, and the tools that I've given you, are not aimed at that level. They're aimed at you. They're aimed at you. Um, what can you do? What can you do to create the kind of transformative dialogue that we've talked about? Good place to start is in your own home. Washington, the Vatican are not good places to start right now because we are who we are. We can't affect them. So start at home, take responsibility for yourself, be open, realize that your point of view is only your point of view. Be open to what the other person has to say. Open yourself up and start creating trust. And Charlie, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. A little bit of trust, a little bit of trust. 3 pounds goes up to 5 pounds, goes up to 7 pounds, goes up to 15 pounds. And that's the way you do it. I just want to acknowledge that we're going over
Ariane,
time.
a question came in the chat that I think is we should take up. How do you initiate dialogue with someone who has closed themselves off from you?
What does that mean, close themselves off from you? Does that mean that they won't take your phone calls? They don't listen to you? What does that mean?
Maureen, do you want to answer that?
Because if a person, well, let me just answer what comes to mind. If a person is not taking your phone calls, won't speak to you, you can't do anything. So if that's what you mean by close themselves off, you can't initiate anything. If, on the other hand, what you mean is someone who's not listening to you, then remember the orange glasses. I used to tell people, if someone keeps telling you the same thing over and over again, listen harder. You haven't gotten them. They haven't gotten that you got it. So if someone has closed themselves off from you, I would just say, I don't think I've ever really heard you. I had my own stuff going on and I've never really heard you. And I would really like to find out what it is that you're saying, because this is really important to me. You're really important to me. And that's the way I would initiate it.
You know, Ariane, I can't help but think about that. You say, well, if you just want to convert somebody and bludgeon them over the head, go for it. But if you really want to convert someone, really you accomplish your goal by listening.
That's
You
it.
don't
The
have
answer
to.
is simple. The doing is very difficult. But the answer is simple. It's, can you open yourself up? Do you have the courage to open yourself up? Do you have the courage to be uncertain? And do you have the courage to be curious and just receive, listen what it is that they have to say, and be willing to see where you have some responsibility, not guilt. I don't believe in guilt. That's something that you feel from within that keeps you from growing. It's a defense mechanism. But responsibility is, how did I participate in this? What, how can I look at this where I see how I have perpetuated this relationship?
Pat, let's go back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted, I'm still so impressed with how I changed with regard to my sister through your help in facilitating that situation. I won't go into all the details, but it was one of those she will not answer phone calls kind of thing. And what happened was that something changed in me, where I suddenly felt so much greater compassion for her, when before that all I felt was judgment. Now, we still haven't spoken. She still doesn't answer phone calls. But if that day does come, I'm going to be a different person talking to her. And that's going to make all the difference. So this whole idea of converting someone else is off the table. It is off the table, because you can't go in there with this idea that I'm going to convert them. That might happen spontaneously as a result of caring enough to truly ask all the questions that help you to find out more and more about where they're coming from and why they think the way they do. Totally non-judgmentally, just, I want to know, I want to understand. Please, please do that for me, And so if enough of us are doing it, here's the deal, if enough of us are doing this with all the people in our lives, that change will happen, just like with Daryl, I believe. And maybe we won't live long enough to see what we want to see, but so it has to start somewhere. And, so those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah,
And if it's to happen, it has to begin with you and me.
That's
that
right.
reminds me of that song that we sang for high school graduation at Immaculate Heart, where let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me.
Right, me,
right.
yes.
That was a good one. Yeah. So, Rini, do you want to say some more things?
Yeah, if there are no other comments, please add your email to the chat if you are not on our list. We will send out the recording of this so that you can not only listen to it again, but share it with anyone else in your life that you may want to perhaps open a door. We'll also then offer this again, same time next week. It'll be offered again this one more time today. It will be at 8 p.m. Eastern time today, which will be Tuesday in many parts of the world. So this will be offered live again. We won't just use a recording. We will offer it live to give everyone a chance to participate. But we'll also send out an invitation for the same time next week, offered again live twice, to give people an opportunity to really experience this. If anyone on this call has someone that you'd be willing to invite onto the call and be the demonstration, be the one that actually presents this with Ariane's guidance, help, and facilitation to help you through as you hit obstacles or run into those blocks where you absolutely stop hearing each other again, Ariane will be there. But if anybody is willing to step forward and be that demonstration, please let us know. Put it into the dialogue or write to us at CCRI. That's info@catholicchurchreform.com. And just let us know that you'd be willing to step forward with that. On that note, let's close, as always, with our closing prayer. Out loud and all together. Creator God, we thank you for the encounter with one another today. We know that where 2 or 3 are gathered, you are in our midst. Thank you for being with us and for the courage to speak boldly and with passion, and the humility to listen with open hearts.
We ask
We
you.
ask you to continue to walk with us as we discover the pathway toward the future you are calling us to. Amen. And I can't help but notice that that word, having the humility, is in our closing prayer. And it's that humility that Ariane is calling us to have, to realize that we just don't really know everything. There's so much we have to take in and learn and understand. So if you want to go forward with this, we'll see you again either later today or again next week. In the meantime, Ariane, thank you so very, very much. Many thank yous came through the chat for what you have opened us up to. And thanks to Alexandra, Mary Louise, and Pat for helping organize this and for continuing to help us organize this. Thank you to everyone. And Ariane will be back with you a little bit later today.
Thank you.
Thank you.